All right, everyone, we're gonna go ahead and get started here. So if you wanna take your seats, I've got just a couple housekeeping announcements. Okay, before we get rolling, just a couple of housekeeping things. If you haven't noticed already, the Wi-Fi network and passwords on the back wall. Bathrooms are around the corner to your right as you walk out of the room. Composting, because of the climate action plan, we have the co-benefit of a compost bin in the back. The coffee cups, I do not believe are compostable.
They're not exactly, or recyclable.
Unfortunately, but we wanted to call attention to that. And then we're going to be doing a little bit of lunch right around noon today too, and that's purely optional, but make yourself at home, coffee and muffins, and Mayor Billick is going to welcome us and kick us off.
Yeah, I thought I would just start the session with two observations I thought I would share with you. So one observation, so the last couple of weeks I've been in a couple different meetings. We had the mayor's meeting in Denver, which is Colorado Municipal League, so I got to hang out with a bunch of, I think, 1,800 mayors. And then last week we had the Colorado Association of Ski Towns. And the two observations, one is sort of like big picture. When I move out around the state, like Crested is the place that people wish they lived in. And so there's a sense that, and I know it doesn't always look like that from inside, because we're struggling, we see our mistakes, we see our work. But to a lot of people around the state, like there was a council member from Granby, and she's like, I'm going to be in Crested the next month. I'm going to be taking the bus staying at my council meetings, but Crested is where I want to hang out. And I hear different versions of that because it just feels like we've done a good job of keeping things a lot of communities have lost. And the metric that I often look at is what are our percentage of units that are full-time occupied. And it's just devastating when you look in other communities and you realize like 15% of the units are full-time occupied, and we're up around 2/3. And so I'm not saying that we've figured it all out, that we've got it right, that there aren't major issues, but when you compare what we've done to other communities, both in, football is like the eye test, but also when you look at the metrics, like I think we're doing a lot of things right. And that's because people in the community put a lot of work in and we build that community. And then the second observation, we had someone at the mayor's meeting talk about strategic planning. And I've seen a lot of bad strategic plans. I've seen a lot of good strategic plans, maybe not as many good strategic plans as bad strategic plans. But I think that often strategic planning is a cookie cutting process where you have a consultant like, this is how I always do things, and this is what you need to do because I was successful. And so if you just did what I tell you to, you'll be successful. And I think the reality is what we as communities need to do is figure out like, who are we? Where do we want to be? What really matters to us? And then what are the steps for getting there? And every community needs something different because they're just at a different place. They just have different needs. And I think that this process that we're going through, both with the community compass, where we started with a very cookie cutter strategic plan, but redirected from like a list of action items to, authentic, bold, connected, accountable. That was kind of what the community needed. And I think this community plan is really sort of the next step of what we need. And I'm super excited because I think we're working through issues. They're often abstract, they're hard for people to understand, but I think we've identified that planning activity that will actually make this community a better place. And so it doesn't mean that what we end up with will be perfect, that there won't be wars, it won't be hard, but it's a process. And our community will always be in the process of becoming. We'll never get there. And that's what makes it a great thing, is that we get to participate in that process of becoming. And so I just wanted to thank you all for participating in that process. And I think the health of this community is the fact that we have so many people sitting around this table after a fairly extensive planning process, because there's a sense that what you all do will make a difference and will make this community better. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Miles.
Thank you, Mayor. And thank you all for being here today. And where we want to start is in the spirit of the community plan, to get us all into aspirational thinking and thinking about the future of our community as we go around and introduce ourselves today. we want to hear, name any organizational affiliations, but also what are you excited about from a community perspective this year? There's a lot of change that's happening everywhere, from the highest levels down to the most micro local levels. So what we want to do is just kick it off with a little aspirational moment and introduce ourselves. I'll start. I'm Miles Graham. I've had the privilege and the pleasure of facilitating the Compass process since, gosh, I think some of our first meetings were early in 2021, and it's a process meant to manage and create the change that the community wants to see. And to Mayor Billick's point, it is not a cookie cutter plan. It is a reflection of the community. And so I have the good fortune of working in a lot of different communities around the state, from, home near Telluride to Aspen and Durango, Denver. And there is no plan I've seen that is unique as the Compass and reflects the values of the community as well as Compass does. So that's what I'm excited for, is the ability of this community to manage that change. That sometimes change feels slow and incremental. Sometimes it feels more ever present and a little bit headier. And I think we're, in one of those moments right now. So that's what I'm excited, is to see how this community uses the tools that it's been developing for years to manage that change. And we've got change even locally at the town level. And so I'm going to flip it to Troy and Mel to talk a little bit about that.
Good morning, everyone. You know that I am leaving the city. I like the Compass in living by my values. And my biggest value is being connected to the ones I love, and I need to be more present in their lives. But it's the Compass that obviously has been a lot blood, sweat, and tears of all of us, of living intentionally. I think the difference, as the mayor said, is who are we and what do we value? And know that first before then what do we need to address together. And that's what the Compass does, and that's what I'm doing. And I think the best part about this is Dara's decision to continue the leadership and endorse Mel as the interim director so we can keep going intentionally. I'm going to be around reducing hours as we go to make sure we have the capacity so they can transition and live by their values. So it's with a heavy heart, but with huge excitement that I can live by my values, and that Mel and the team and you all can continue the journey that you're on. So I just wanted to say that.
Thank you, Troy, and good morning, everyone. It is such an honor, and I'm so grateful to step into this role and really continue this work with all of you, knowing we have such an amazing team and such a dedicated community as well. It's kind of wild to look back to those initial Compass workshops in this room 4 years ago, and just see the work that's continued. And I'm just so thankful for all of you joining and participating and really engaging in those processes, even though it's not easy and it takes time. So I'm very committed to continue that collaboration as we move forward. To kick off introductions, I do want to also introduce a new member of our committee this morning, which is John O'Neill, who joined our council in December and jumped right into joining the Community Plan Advisory Committee. And our Community Plan Advisory Committee members today are really going to help us co-facilitate the breakout groups, which we're really excited about. So John, I'll let you introduce yourself next.
Yeah, John O'Neill, really happy to be here. Feel like I kind of showed up at the party late, but really glad to be at the party. I'm just excited about all the work you've done. I think it's incredible, the plans that have been created. And I'm just happy to be here, and especially, why I joined council was hopefully to be on the part of the community plan. It just helps shape the future of Crested Butte. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Let's go ahead and quickly introduce the rest of our community plan committee. We'll come back to our staff and then we'll go around the horn. So let's see, let's go. Kent, do you want to go?
I'm Kent Coward. I'm council. Been around the valley since 1988. We moved here in 1990. So I've seen a lot of this change. It's incremental development already. So I'm really excited about trying to understand how we can kind of unlock all the potential of what's left in town in undeveloped property or redevelopment of property, additions, remodels. So I'm excited to kind of get to the meat of how we can influence and get the best outcome for our town as we move forward.
Jessica.
Hi, I'm Jessica Lincoln. I am under Crested. I'm Erica. I was born and raised here, so I've definitely seen the changes. In town books. I have twin girls who have said that they don't want to leave the valley yet. They're only 10, so.
Hold them to it.
That might take you. And even though the community plan, I'm really excited to see that Crested Butte isn't built out. And that there is so much potential to shape, you know, whatever growth comes our way. And
Let's go to Roxana and then we'll come back around.
Roxana Alvarez, I do interior design, I have a gallery in town, I've been here, I think at this point, 22 years. My kids were born and raised here. And I've been on both for 11 years. I took Bob Van the word senior, he was on there for 16 years, I feel like that's his curse.
In a good way.
And I don't know, I mean, I've enjoyed, I don't think everybody has enjoyed being around me during this process, but I care a lot about this community, and I think I've spent a lot of time shaping it or helping shape it through Bozar, and I think I started to really understand how we could shape it. Although I still think that that we need to keep our minds open to seeing other possibilities, because it's one of those things where as we craft, I think the ground around us will start to shift. So I don't see this as a one and done. Obviously, it's an ongoing process.
Thank you. And I want to recognize one last member of our community plan committee who couldn't be here today, but that's Jim Starr. He's been very dedicated through this whole process and was out of town this week, but wanted to recognize him. Let's kick it over to Jesse and then we'll go around the table.
I'm Jessie Early. I work for the Community Development Department in current planning. And I am the Historic Preservation Plan Manager. And I'm excited for this next year to see all of the plans start with implementation. I mean, the transportation mobility plan's already been in motion for a while, but just obviously I'm partial to the historic preservation plan, but I'm excited for all the plans and how they're gonna connect together this year and moving forward.
Are we sharing our goals for, we are, okay. I'm Dana, I'm the sustainability coordinator for the town. I'm the project manager on the climate action plan, and I think what I'm excited for is to, I'll echo Jesse, kind of jump into implementation. Since I've been in my role, been doing a lot of planning, so excited to kind of hit the ground running.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name is Alexa. I'm the new Civic Spark Fellow. I'm working with Dana in the sustainability department. And I'm really excited just to get to know this community better. I've never had a chance to be a part of such a small but tight-knit and strong community, and I think it's really inspiring that there's still towns like this that exist. So yeah, I'm just excited to get to know this area better.
I'm Bill Cunningham, longtime resident, geez, oh, geez, oh. This year's gonna be 50 years that I've lived here. Just like, you know, when I said 30, I was thinking it was a long time. Jesus, like, whatever. So, yeah, been a part of lots of nonprofits and been on the transportation committee. So that's kind of my hat, I think, has been all the nonprofits I've helped. And all the events I've helped start. I mean, geez, I helped start the Alley Loop 39 years ago, and that's shocking. You know, so, that was a fun event too. Thank you, town, for everything you guys did to make it happen. I think it was one of the best energy alley loops I've seen in a long, long time. And with the people that came in from out of town and with all the locals that were just so psyched and charged up. So yeah, thanks, town, for it, because
all of a sudden, 3 o'clock, friggin' the Elk Avenue's open again. You're like going, what? How did you do this? And it's just like, wow, there you go. Yeah, thanks.
Thanks, though.
Is Michael, I work for the Gunnison Valley Regional Housing Authority. I've been basically looking in energy efficiency for a long time, and it's been on the climate action committee, been in the valley for like 27 years now. And I think, yeah, apart from like looking at it from an everything from an energy efficiency lens, I think like I'm excited to be part of this process, because I'm, especially with like a lot of the developments that are happening right now, local power is really necessary. And yeah, I'm happy to, like, that's where our growth is, and that's where our development can be locally.
Donnie DeVal on Bozar and the Climate Action Plan Committee. I guess I'm kind of looking forward to really seeing how all these plans come together and affect one another. And keep hearing the public comment. I think we live in a great place where it's just kind of a really nice size where people feel like they have an ability and a desire to speak up and share their concerns and goods and bads with everyone. So that's exciting.
Nicole.
Nicole Blazer, and I'm part of the Climate Action Planning Committee. I also volunteer and very active with the Gunnison Valley Climate Crisis Coalition, and I chair their community engagement committee. We have a film quest coming up in May that we're starting to plan. Hope to see you all there. It's really super fun. And I'm incredibly excited to see what the future holds for this town, but also for the world in general. I feel like if I think back to even 5 years ago of what I'm seeing happening in the world today, this being a really amazing example. I think there's just a domino effect happening in the world. There've been some conferences in Europe and some different sat in some different circles of different things happening along the lines of what we're doing here, not just climate action, but you know, what's the world really need now? And there's some really exciting stuff happening that I feel inspired, where several years ago I felt defeated and what are we gonna do? And so I see this as like a stepping stone, but an incredibly important stepping stone where we don't even know what's gonna unfold from here yet. And I'm just excited to be a part of it and feel privileged, and I'm very proud of everyone in this work.
Thanks, Nicole. Anna?
I'm Anna. I'm on the town council as part of the transportation committee. I'm really excited to see what happens in the post office.
I'm Eric Mullen, Chair of Bozar, Historic Preservation Plan member also. This year, looking forward, to implementation of some of these plans, also implementation of some of my plans to create more long-term housing down in Gunnison. Yeah, I mean, I like making things happen and the opportunities. I want to be part of it.
Darren McDonald, town manager. What's been on my mind recently is just how people respond to change. And one small example is our relocation right now from town hall for remodeling upstairs. And so a bunch of people moved to the depot, a bunch of people moved around in town hall, and just how people respond to that in little different ways, for good, for bad, for, you know, how that acts out. It's intriguing, and I think that's just the microcosm for, you know, larger responses to change in the communities. Support your staff right now. Everybody's been great. It's gonna be fun.
Just begun.
Chris Hensley, I was on the transportation committee, and haven't been around as long as Glow, but long enough to see a lot of change to this community, and some of that's kind of sad to me, the change that we've seen. So I'm excited about the energy and effort that's been put into this process, so that there's some real intention with where we want to be. And I think we've lacked that in the past, so. Some of that change, I think, has been experienced because of that, the lack of intention and kind of planning, so. I think this is great.
That's Chris. Cal.
I'm Cal Fennerty. I also sat on the Transportation Planning Committee. And I think that I am, I'm here mostly just to remind everybody that Crested Butte is not Disneyland or Aspen, and it never will be. And my buddy is not here, but that's what I'm here to represent. Excited to keep that moving forward.
Thank you.
I'm Valita Scribner. I was part of the Climate Action Planning Committee, which apparently was a natural progression, and the connections both through the Climate Action Planning Committee, that experience, and through that Masters of Environmental Management to my now current seat on Mount Crested Butte Town Council as of November. So I'm really just loving the ability to take everything that, learned over the course of developing the climate action plan through all of us working together, and be able to start applying that sort of real-time decision-making around new developments in Mount Crested Butte that also has a community to really honestly protect and defend their values and keep it from becoming like a Disneyland or a community with 5% long-term year-round residents. So I'll say all that to say that I feel like I'm very much in a learning mode because there's so much to observe how that process takes shape, and just feel really fortunate to be able to be in that role. I'm also on the Gunnison Valley Regional Housing Authority Board as a part of town council, as well as RTA and Mountain Express, and so get to really help pull all those pieces together to support the community.
Awesome. And thank you all. And the first item on our agenda today really was grounding ourselves in our values and the positive outcomes that we seek. So hearing it all in your own words is such a great way to start the meeting. The other pieces that we want to hit on today are just make sure we do some quick updates on where all these different plans sit, but not take a lot of time with that. The bulk of the meeting today is really intended to dig into the draft community plan that is out there. And as you all know from our last meeting back in September, the community plan is a beast. When we're looking at the policy toolkits, there's a lot of different tools that can apply to areas of stability, areas of potential change. So today, we're going to pull up at the high policy level. And as we break out for the bulk of our meeting, we're going to split up into 4 groups, and we're going to go and kind of speed date all the different areas of change and areas of stability so we can run through and really score our success measures against some of the draft recommendations in the plan. So that the high level categories are the use, the density, and the fit. And so we're going to be looking at each of the areas of change and the neighborhood areas of stability within that lens. And so that'll be the bulk of the meeting today, but we do want to make sure we ground ourselves in our values and all the different plans that are happening. So you can see our agenda. We're going to quickly get to our breakout activity here. We're a little behind schedule, but we built in some extra time because we do want to take enough time for us all to go through, get familiar with some of those draft recommendations and score them, see what resonates. The recommendations, and I should just acknowledge the hard work of the Community Plan Advisory Committee. I think they've met 8 times and have done a lot of the heavy lifting. So those draft recommendations and the success measures that we're going to be scoring them against are recommendations for a reason. And the Community Plan Advisory Committee has brought those recommendations in draft form for everybody's feedback to really see what resonates you know, what maybe is missing, what doesn't make sense, and get your feedback on that. So that'll be the bulk of the discussion today. And then we're gonna do a group report out and roundtable discussion. So we all have a chance to share our key takeaways and give feedback to staff so that we can refine this draft plan into its final draft product and keep that process moving. And then, as we always do, we'll wrap up this meeting with public comment. I don't think we've got anybody on the line yet. So if we need it, and if anybody joins us, we're always happy to take that. And then we'll break some bread and adjourn. So with that, we're going to start with just a big picture look at all these different plans together. So I think, were you gonna take this one or?
Yeah, so
Okay.
I'll just quickly touch on this. You may have seen this slide before, but a lot of the times we've really been in these committees this last year, working on preservation, working on climate action. It's helpful to take a step back to think, oh, we're not just planning to plan, it's gonna go on forever. It really is working together. So 4 years ago, it really started with the compass at that high atmospheric level of what are our shared goals and values and who are we and where do we want to go? Let's really start there. Now we're going a little deeper and more specific into what is our vision, plan, and strategy on these topics. We'd love to really help meet our strategic goals. But there's so much more to come from there. From there, we'll codify those in our regulations and our programs. What is our sustainability program? How are we codifying our historic preservation plan in our town regulations? And same with the community plan. And all of that can really be realized on the street level, the new affordable housing going up, implementing parking change or traffic calming or things like that. They all connect back to the compass. So it's helpful to just take a step back and remember this work really is influencing our day-to-day here.
Awesome, Mel, thank you. And just a quick summary. So you all know transportation and mobility plans adopted, historic preservation plans adopted, climate action plan very close to being adopted, and community plan, which is why we're all here in draft form. So instead of going into the nuts and bolts of all these different plans, what we're going to do as staff runs through the quick updates is really focus on some of those implementation actions and celebrate some of the progress that has already been made. So Troy is going to lead us off with transportation after we walk through one more break slide.
This is just where we are, as Miles said. They've all been following the compass framework, and it's really cool to see how a year ago you're all at step one, and these plans are really making a lot of progress.
Thanks, Bob.
And so the transportation plan, as you know, is being implemented, but it's really important. I think what the mayor said is betterment. And the whole purpose of Compass is we can never do enough community outreach from concept to construction. So the town council is very intentionally hearing, we can always pace the amount of implementation and it will be forever paced by council and feedback from the community. So where we are for 2025 is the Red Lady Roundabout is moving forward. We're going to be issuing a design RFP in March. That is funded by the town and the school, and it's for the school to open. It has to be implemented for CDOT to grant a CO to the school for their opening. There's federal questions. We just got yesterday, and I'm going to share it with the mayor and Dara, the new executive order that is cost benefit based. And just to tell you, the design has no federal money, the construction does. So that's a year out. But the cost benefit analysis that was presented in the executive order last night was the exact same metric that the Safe Streets for All used to put this project there. So I feel very confident that this project is going to score well in the new administration based on cost benefit. So it's going. As for parking and traffic calming, there's going to be, staff doesn't anticipate a change, but for all of you, if you have concerns about parking management, traffic calming, council's going to have a work session every spring. This one's going to be March 3rd on just reviewing how the last year went for parking and traffic calming, and have a discussion, and they'll give direction to staff on what's coming next. But there is no current program significant difference between 24 and 25 in either parking or traffic calming. And then the last thing is a reminder that we're a little postage stamp within a big North Valley. Next slide. And what the county and the town and, all of our partners in the North Valley are gonna be doing is the CO 135 corridor and 3 mile plan. And there's a big transportation component of that is what is the long-term vision for CO 135, including the 4-way intersection. RTA and Mountain Express, what are the long-term capital visions for that? Are we putting a parking ride at CB South, Gunnison, Almont? How big is the park and ride lot at Brush Creek? And then tying that to land use and working with the county and their LUR in our 3 mile area is try to get more certainty for the community to understand what the LUR is going to create from a character perspective. Instead of right now, the LURs, there's so much uncertainty what it produces. And the corridor plan will certainly do that. And it's going to be coordinated with our schools, our parks, our fire districts to understand their impact. So it is coordinated with the entire North Valley, funded by the entire North Valley, and that'll be starting sometime this summer.
Yeah, and we're gonna pause for some Q&A after we run through all the plans. So I think now we're gonna give a quick update on the historic preservation.
Thanks, Miles. So, and I think you can hop to the next slide if you want to. The historic preservation plan was adopted by the town council in December of 2024. So quickly, we applied for a grant to do some survey work of the proposed period of significance from 1961 to 1984. So of those buildings, and to narrow that down to which buildings contribute. And then that will help to inform the updates to both the zoning code and the design standards and guidelines, which will be a whole new section in the design standards and guidelines. And then there are other updates to the zoning code as well, relating to what comes out of the community plan, obviously, the demolition code, and then reducing that local area boundary to create the buffer as well. So a lot of things that'll be happening this year and starting in 2026 to carrying over to 2026. So that's,
yeah. Thanks, Jesse. And really quick, we'll go into climate action.
Yeah.
Dan, thank you.
The climate action plan was slated for adoption on Monday. Council asked staff to just carefully consider some of the recommendations in the plan before they were fully comfortable supporting and adopting that plan. So we're hoping that they'll consider adopting at the February 3rd meeting after staff meets to talk about just some of the recommendations in the plan. This is good. This is not a bad thing. It just helps us make the plan a little bit better. And council was kind in saying they want the entire council to be supportive of the recommendations we're making. But just so folks know, once we do adopt, this is what we're anticipating will come first of the plan. We'll be updating building code and design guidelines, excuse me. You've been hearing that across all the plans. We'll be incorporating some requirements around energy assessments. We'll be working on incentives to help people do those energy assessments. We will be working on a town facilities energy monitoring plan that will help us identify which buildings can use the most help over the next few years. And then, of course, we'll always be working with GCA. That will just continue on, but working with them to hopefully institutionalize and continue their momentum forward on renewable energy. So that's what to expect. Thank you.
Thanks, Dean. And certainly we want any questions from you all, but really in this moment, we were wanting to acknowledge all of the progress that's been made. And in the introductions, one of the constant themes was change, and that change is constant. And we've been working for years now to develop the tools to create the change we want to see. So Crested Butte remains Crested Butte, one of the greatest, if not the greatest place on earth. So what stands out to you with these updates? What questions do you have? What do you just want to acknowledge and celebrate from all the hard work that this community has done? And I think it's also important to acknowledge a theme that came up at the beginning is progress is by definition sometimes imperfect, and it's an iterative process that takes time, and that work and that community engagement never stops. So we wanted to take a moment to hear from you all on what stands out to you. What questions do you have? What do you just want to celebrate?
Just say, I know that there are many people for whom change scares them, especially with a town that and a community that we hold so dear. And I also want to say that I feel like the intentionality behind the plans that we're making and seeing that intentionality actually go into action, that I find it super inspiring. And yes, that might shift the way things look around here, but it's not without a whole lot of, great hearts and minds, coming together to make those happen. So, I'm inspired seeing, plans go into action. So, well done.
Thank you.
I feel like there's a better understanding amongst at least a part of the community that change is inevitable, that's coming, and rather than I appreciate the people who are, fighting to keep things. I think that's really important. Part of the people, but also with the recognition that change is inevitable and it's here. And so I think that putting those parts together has served this process well. It wasn't perfect, but it's change is coming, and let's harness that change the best we can. I feel like that vibe is out there.
That's such good feedback, and I think such an important piece of the role that this navigation committee has played over the past year plus too is helping to be that two-way link to communication and take the pulse of the community and what you're seeing and feeling out there too, and giving staff and us feedback, but also taking that information out to the broader community. So thanks for that. What else stands out, Ken?
I'm inspired by the creativity in each update, each of these committees, and imagining new things and thinking about potential future in a new way. And I'm proud to be part of this community that has this creativity and imagination and can think in different ways. So that's something that I recognize and want to celebrate, is we're all being very creative and bold, stepping into new ideas.
Excellent. And when you have intentionality and creativity combined, it helps to manage that change. Yeah.
I think for me, why I wanted to join council is because I saw the Compass as this collective community dream. Like, this is what we all want for our community. And I just wanted to be a part of fighting for it and going after it. And so to see all the work and intentionality that went into plans to go after our dream is incredibly inspiring to me. And so, yeah, just the commitment, the investment, the intentionality, all of it to go after this future that we all want is incredible. So, yeah, I'm inspired. So, yeah.
I guess the thing I think a lot about is the disconnect between the value of what people will pay for real estate and sort of the like the day-to-day value of that. And I feel like we've been chasing that as a community at least for 30 years. And we were very fortunate, Glow and a bunch of other people stepped up at Open Space to really shape sort of these values. And then I feel like we were some ways ahead of the curve on housing. It's the same problem, right? Like, how much is the rancher's land worth relative to how much they can sell that cow for? And it's the same problem with housing. Like, how much can someone who is working up at the ski resort pay for a mortgage or rent? And it's not at all proportional to what other people will pay. I think 25% of the units in the town of Crested, Butte are deed restricted, which is great. We're ahead of that, but we're still way behind too. But for me, the piece that the Community Compass offers is we really got ahead of the curve on open space. I feel like we've made a lot of progress recently on housing, a lot to go there, but the shared community spaces. So yards, subcontractors and trades, these spaces that we need in order for our community to function. We've had success with open space and with housing, but now we really need to focus on like these shared spaces that are needed, like childcare, right? Like, there's not gonna be another Jessica who comes in and buys real estate and starts a for-profit company to run childcare, right? Like, that model is probably gone. So super excited that the Community Compass is taking on Nordic Center for the Arts, trades, childcare. How can we can't buy our way out of this. There's got to be a strong regulatory component. But I think the Community Compass sets that foundation. So anyway, that's what I'm excited.
Anything else? Excellent. Well, I think this is all great framing for why we're here today, to talk about the community plan that's knitting so many of these ideas and the work that's been done to date together. So as we mentioned before, there is a lot of moving parts in this community plan. Mel is going to break it down for us and give us some good definitions and set the stage for the breakout groups that we're going to be headed into shortly.
So yeah, thank you all. So moving into the community plan. Just a quick recap on what is this plan and what is its goal, and I think both Ian and Nicole hit it pretty well. We're not trying to make this community plan to just change Crested Butte for the sake of change. We're recognizing change is happening to us, but how do we make sure to take the reins of that and go into the future we want, to a future that is authentic, connected, accountable, and bold. And this plan is all about improving the livability, functionality, and sense of community here by leveraging our development regulations to stimulate free market investment in community serving housing, businesses, and nonprofits. We recognize our market is out of whack currently. We have a bifurcated housing market where the town is the sole kind of affordable housing developer, the county is, the municipalities are, or the free market's producing luxury hotels or a new expensive restaurant or things like that. And that's just a symptom of our current land values combined with our development regulations. So how can we leverage our regulations to really have the free market be a better partner with us in getting to the community we really want to be? So we've been working on this for just under a year now, and thank you again to our committee and everyone who participated, whether through the surveys last summer, the block parties, the charrette. There's been so much community outreach along the way, and we are moving now from that design phase where our last committee meeting was in September, coming out of the charrette. Our minds and brains, I think, were overloaded with all the ideas that came out of that workshop, into the discussion phase. We're really excited to come out with a preview of the draft plan to you all to help us improve before we go public with that. Following all this, we'll go right into that code update to make sure what we come out of the plan is really codified in our code. So we're really excited to introduce the draft community plan. This is published for your all review, and the advisory committee went over it last week. It's very much just a draft, and we want your help to help us improve it before we plan to release it in March for a community feedback period and some more outreach. We rewrote the compass over 7 times. We can always make things better. We can always make things shorter, more Crested Butte, more authentic to us. So please, I know it's a lot that went out there, but just noodle on it, think about it, and think about what's some feedback you have to help us improve the document. We do have a plot up there right now for any initial reactions, but later we'll go over, we're going to give you a few weeks to really think about any more specific edits to share with us. What the plan does is it introduces the plan and its process, and then really sets the stage on those types of challenges this plan is looking at. We have a bifurcated housing market. We have an economic paradox where our sales tax and our land values keep going up, but our buying power for our residents is going down, and we have a real challenge with that. We're on a hamster wheel of affordable housing development. We keep building housing, but it's never going to be enough. And our development regulations aren't necessarily producing what the community wants or needs. So that explains our context and leads into defining measures of success using the compass framework of tying our goal to our core values to identify what does success look like for the community plan. And that's going to be the focus of our breakout groups today, is seeing how are those considerations in the draft stacking up against those success measures. From there, and what the big focus today is going to be is looking at the chapters on Crested Butte's future and unlocking potential. The future identifies what is our vision, while the compass sets out our values and goals and who we are. This looks at what is our physical vision for the town. When it comes to the full town, what kind of community do we want to be, as well as some subvisions for those areas of stability and areas of change. And then from there, how do we unlock potential in our development regulations through our community plan toolbox to make that vision possible and enable it to happen, enable the free market to help us achieve that. Lastly, this plan sets the stage and plants the seed for a new 5-year housing and resilient community plan to really look at what sort of incentives, programs, projects can help complement this plan and our development regulations when it comes to phase 2 of the Center for the Arts, supporting childcare, looking at more community serving spaces and hubs. How can we leverage our resources as a town to be a partner back in this plan as well? And then lastly, it ends up with that connection to the upcoming corridor plan. So the community plan vision, the draft vision is all about a thriving Crested Butte, where you want to be a thriving, close-knit community that's rooted in its values. Our small town charm is preserved with really thoughtful in-town growth, continuing to maintain those cherished open spaces, ranch lands surrounding us. We have vibrant commercial corridors with local businesses and housing. Our neighborhoods are continue to feel really historic, small scale, and have diverse housing. Our community is spread throughout the neighborhood. We have really strong community connections with shared spaces, and we recognize it takes effort. It's not easy to live here. It takes grit, but it's really possible to build a future here, knowing that the community has your back, and if you give to the community, it will support you back, and we really value people here over property. So that's just a very rough draft over the process that has taken place. So please think on this, and we will today in the breakouts talk about subvisions around the 4 areas we're going to focus on. Help us add more color to these visions, help us make it more authentic. I remember when we first came out with the compass, there was an editorial from Mark saying this just feels so blah, like any plan anywhere. And I remember in this room, I said to Troy, let's authenticate this plan. Let's make it Crested Butte. We need your help to help us do that, make it really feel like it's rooted in our values.
And I just want to pause. A lot of times community plans are about the physicality of a community, 3 stories, 4 rooms. This, like the compass, and the compass is so unique, and I have a colleague in Charlotte mention it because I shared it with him. He said, this is the first comprehensive plan that it's more about the community than the physical space. And so when you look at these descriptions, the physicality is where the community lives. If you read the community plan and the compass, it's all about the people in the community that the physical space is accommodating. So don't forget that. Don't get confused that it's all about the physical. It's not. There's nothing in this plan, and the way we intend the zoning to be is performance-based. You can keep the status quo, or you can get this physical addition only if you help us create community. So it's just really important to remember it's about community and physical.
Exactly. Thanks for that reminder. All right, so what I'm going to do now is go into that unlocking potential introduces a community plan toolbox. I'm just going to give a quick primer explaining this as some foundation for the considerations we're going to talk about. But don't worry, like our past meetings, we're not going to spend our breakouts amping up the dial or turning it down in the toolbox. Our committee has spent a lot of time working on that. We've also met with council and BOZAR on it too. So we want to use their considerations as the foundation today and really focus on measuring that against the success measures. So we're looking at here our zoning code and its influence on market development. And all of these toolboxes are like a mixing board. We can dial up, we can dial down. It's all about finding just the right mix of sound for Crested Butte. And recognizing our mixing board might look different in our neighborhoods or areas of stability than they might look on Bellevue. And Bellevue might be different than 6th Street corridor. So we're going to get into the specifics of those areas in the breakout. What we're looking at on the x-axis here is 3 key topics of our zoning code. First is land use mix, which is what does the market want to produce and what does the town need? What types of land uses are we permitting in an area, whether it's permitted by right, whether it's conditional, we'll consider it in that area if you meet certain conditions, or whether it's not allowed. Along the mixing board, we have more restrictive on the bottom where it's single use, saying in the neighborhoods, you can only be residential. In this area, you can only be these types of land uses. At the top is no restriction. It's the Houston model. You can do whatever you want. Let's let the market decide. And somewhere in the middle could be mixed use. We can have a mix of different uses in different areas. The next is density. And we're looking here at both commercial density, which is measured as floor area ratio, how much of a use is taking up space on a site. And then with residential density, how many units are there per acre? How much of that residential use are taking up a site as well? And the question here is, should density be used as an incentive for the town to get what it needs? On the bottom would be our current regulations. We have different limits on FAR for commercial and for residential throughout the town. We can always restrict it more and have less density. We can always go to -1. At the top, again, is that Houston model. You can build as much density as you want. Or somewhere in the middle, we're introducing a concept around performance-based zoning, around performance requirements or performance bonuses, where we can use that as a tool to leverage to say, hey, you can have a little more residential density in this area if we get something out of it. So you can have more if you deed restrict some of those units for residential or commercial to be more affordable to and community serving for our residents and for our local businesses. And then lastly is fit. While land use is what type of use, density is how much of that use, fit is how does it actually fit on a site. So what we're looking at here is building heights, setbacks, open space, and parking. With building heights at the bottom, we could have our current requirement, which is about 35 feet, kind of amalgamated across the town, where we could go up to the top and say, you can have as much height as you want, or somewhere in the middle, we could have some performance bonuses of say, we'll talk about on 6th Street, you can have a few extra feet of height to be able to get more housing out of it. In exchange, some of that housing is deed restricted and permanently affordable. So those are the types of considerations there. Well, this is kind of a broad brush across the entire town. You're going to see through each breakout group, we're proposing different things in these categories for those different areas, recognizing we're not just going to come and say, hey, the height should just be this across the whole town. We have different parts of town that have different looks and feels. The next is setbacks. How far is a building set back from the street, from the back, from the alley, from its neighbors to the side? And this could be used also as a performance requirement to say, hey, if you do this, if you build an ADU, a second ADU or build an ADU, then we'll consider reducing your setback in exchange for getting that use out of it. Setbacks here and same with open space are challenging. We have real considerations. While it doesn't feel like it today, we have big winters and snow storage is a really big deal. So we want to be realistic in all these considerations of recognizing that those setbacks and things play important roles for storing snow and things. We don't want people shedding snow onto their neighbors' properties, and that's a reason for our setbacks today to the side. But there's ways to get creative and think about, could flat roofs play a role in helping with snow shed? Are there other ways to think about that and ways to really structure that in different areas of town? Open space, similar to setbacks, how much of the space on the site are you leaving open? And that's something to think about. Do we want to use that as a tool to get something that we need out of it? And then lastly is parking. And this category is actually going to be talked about in Troy and Jessica's group as a town-wide consideration, because parking right now is regulated by land use, not by certain area. And it's a very important tool to think about in our toolbox because parking takes up a lot of space on a site. And could that space be used for housing or a new business space? That's something to think about. It's a very challenging thing, but as is explained in the town, we have a lot of on-street parking capacity. We have more on-street spaces in the town than we do private parking spaces off-street today. Yes, that does get cut in half in the winter when we need to switch sides. But between that on-street capacity, between the transportation mobility plans commitments to increase transit, to work regionally on regional park and rides, to improve our pedestrian environment, is parking a tool we want to leverage and say, hey, maybe we can reduce these requirements, maybe not take them away fully, but say instead of having to build 2 off-street parking spaces for these units, let's look up on Slate River annexation here. We could say, hey, you could have 1 space off-street per unit, leverage this parking on the street, which currently serves as the valley's storage yard for trailers and snowmobiles and things, and be able to fit twice as many housing units on that site than we could otherwise with our current regulations. So that is something to think about. Is that a tool we want to leverage? And the committee in our considerations is, yeah, let's consider reducing it.
Can we go back one more?
Yep.
And just a note for you guys to ponder, because it's a really,
Oh,
I
yes.
think, seed for change and preservation of this community. Is the town has the opportunity now for lots of technical reasons related to groundwater and stormwater, but also based on value and land costs. That the charrette came out and actually recommended banding structured and underground parking. We don't have any in town right now. But that is such an expensive investment, and our land prices are creeping to the point that it's an incentive. So if you remember Sixth Street Station, they had underground parking. And that wasn't gonna be built for us, right? That's gonna be built for a future investor at a different price point. So we have the ability now to ban underground parking and structured parking. We want you to consider that, because it is probably one of the more powerful tools to pace development cost at a pace that is more aligned with our incomes rather than losing sight. And our peer mountain communities in Telluride, Aspen and Steamboat, and you name the mountain community, that's probably the single most powerful thing that is managing the cost of construction is structured and underground parking. So please consider that.
Thank you for that, Troy.
Well, I would say though, that there's some efficiencies to be gained if land is is so valuable and is so precious around here, then maybe being conscientious with if we do need parking, if we assess the needs of the community. And maybe our transportation systems aren't quite efficient enough to connect everybody to where they live and where they need to go. And still mandate and still require having a vehicle, then, there might be a point where you still need parking to support your community. And thus, if your parking is underground or in a structure where something else is happening on top. So that's not the only use of the land. Whether you've got solar or a park on top or another a residence or businesses, that's where I see a different perspective there, where structures and underground can actually help us better use our land.
So
That's an excellent point.
So I was gonna say, the light bulb came on for me, I think, with 212. And so I think the dynamic we face is that it's easy to keep things from getting done. So the example would be hoods. So we went through a period of time when we had lax inspection of hoods, and then the inspector really clamped down and the restaurants sat empty. And so then, and love Jeff, love Kylina, love what they do, but they spent a lot of capital money on 212. And a lot of that was driven by the hoods, and the restaurant that they built, I'm not gonna go to, right? Because in order for them to pay the hoods off, they're gonna sell 200 or 300 bottles of wine. I haven't seen the brew house. I've heard rumor that there's a $40 beer. I haven't actually walked in to experience it. And I think that the point that Troy's making, it's the same thing with the parking garage, is if we put that in the incentive structure, where that drives as an economic force is to recover the cost of that parking structure, you will necessarily end up with an investment that isn't for any of us.
Okay.
And so it might make sense from a physical perspective in terms of allocation of space, but what it does is it means that real estate sits unused for extended periods of time, and then when someone figures out how to actually bring it to life, it's, if you load a lot of cost up on there, it's because they're gonna sell something to people way wealthier than us. And so figuring out how to pull out that incentive structure, in my mind, the problem we're solving is financial incentives. And what are we pushing people towards? And that's the parking. What was the number on construction costs going vertical? It's like 10x or something like that?
The way parking is, surface parking is X, structured parking is 2x, and underground parking is 4x. And so my only point is just remember the interconnectedness of the planning and holding the transportation plan and our elected officials to the values of they need each other. And the town, Mountain Express, RTA, the county are all committed to a park and ride at Brush Creek. And how can we manage that and make sure the transit is more robust, alternative modes are more robust. Just there's an interconnected, intentional interconnected of this. And your thoughts are great, and that just starts to become symptomatic of, oh, the community plan is supposed to solve this by itself. It is about all four plans moving together.
And this doesn't get rid of mixed use. You can still have surface parking and build something above it.
Exactly.
Not
Yeah, thank you all. It was a great discussion. So at the advice of our committee, thank you, Jessica, we wanted to give a quick example of this toolbox in action with Sixth Street Station, because it is a really good example of that. It actually was kind of a performance-based zoning structure when it first came about. They added the allowance of underground parking into the code as a bonus to, if you provide underground parking, you can have higher commercial FAR. So it was kind of a bonus to the developer. But how can we flip that on its head and say, maybe if we don't allow underground parking, but we give them a little more height or a little something else, a little more residential density, we could get more affordable housing out of it. And again, we're not just trying to change the town for the sake of change. We have entitlements in place. We love how this lot is vacant right now. This is 6th Street between Tia Cali and Butte. But entitlements are in place. Mark Walters bought it. Something will eventually develop there. We don't know when. It could be tomorrow. It could be 100 years from now. But in 2016, an approval did occur with a rendering up here. It has since expired, and that was looking at 62,000 square feet of commercial space, a luxury hotel of 33 units with 66 keys. Out of that, we got 3 affordable housing units. We do have a program called Resident Occupied Affordable Housing, which we will be updating through this plan as well, which says based on a new development and that type of land use and how much of that it generates, how many jobs is that new development generating, and what's the required mitigation of the developer to help mitigate and offset those jobs created through either providing housing units or a payment in lieu. So from that, we're going to get 3 units. That has since expired. So what are some other options that could come in there? Our consultants, Torti Gallus, looked at our code and they were able to come up with a model that had 5,000 square feet of retail. And looking at meeting our FAR and our setbacks, it was actually really challenging for them to actually meet the full FAR potential between the height limits, our parking requirements, and setbacks to actually get there. From that amount of retail, we would get less than 2 row units, 1.64. And on the right is where our current development regulation, our current toolbox is for here. The charrette looked at what if it could be different? What if we do go to that performance-based level? And it contemplated leveraging tools around land use, allowing more residential housing into this area. Right now, it's limited that no more than 50% can be residential. With density, it kept the same FAR for commercial space. It didn't add more commercial density, but allowed more residential density. And with fit, we looked at some minor tweaks in that performance category to get out of it what we would need. So one example that came up with the charrette was your 35-foot height limit is actually likely going to limit achieving 3 stories of buildings here, because retail on the first floor is going to want a little bit higher ceilings. And developers likely aren't going to come in and build to that full potential. So we looked at if we just added 3 feet there from 35 feet to 38 feet, we could get a whole 3rd floor story of height and get some more housing units out of it. So that was an example we looked at. We also looked at increasing the setback by 5 feet and then reducing parking, not having 0 parking, but looking at 1 space per dwelling unit and then 1.8 spaces per 1,000 square feet of space. What they came up with on the right here, the rendering doesn't look all that much different from 6th Street Station. But they were able to fit 25,000 square feet of retail and 80 housing units. And for example, if we said, if we leverage those tools on the toolbox and required, say, hey, out of that, we need 20% of that to be affordable housing, we would get 16 units compared to the 3 that we got with 6th Street Station. So that's just an example of this in action. So we're going to dig into each of these areas more in our groups, and we have our wonderful advisory committee to really help us talk through the considerations in the draft. And we're going to focus on our areas of stability over here, Crested Butte's neighborhoods, where we're looking at an ADU strategy. We're going to talk about Bellevue Avenue, and then the 6th Street corridor will be 2 separate groups in the other room. And then the Slate River annexation, as well as the town-wide parking requirement considerations, will be over in this room over here, and I'll turn it back to Miles to talk through our activity.
Thanks, Mel. And as you can see, when you're looking at a policy toolkit like this in all of the different potential areas we're looking at, it gets pretty complicated pretty fast. And so what we're going to do today, as I said earlier, is really leverage the charter of this group to help reconcile some of those trade-offs. And I think the parking conversation is a perfect example of that. And what this group is really tasked with is helping to make sure that you're not seeing things that are conflicting, flagging things that don't seem to fit our character and our values. And as I said earlier, what we want to do is keep this discussion at a policy level and not get bogged down into the toolkit. So we've created a scorecard, and you'll all get a cheat sheet. So as Mel said, we're going to break into 4 separate groups. You're going to have staff and community plan advisory members stationed at each one of those 4 stations, one for our areas of stability in our residential neighborhoods, one for the townwide applications and the Slate River Annex. And then in the other room, we're going to have Bellevue and 6th. So what we want to do is make sure that our success measures in the community plan, which are draft, are reconciled against the vertical line here on land use recommendations, density recommendations, and fit recommendations. And so we're going to have gold stars, red stickers, and yellow stickers. And so for things that really resonate and you think are right on target, we want to make sure that we're flagging that with a gold star. For things that give you serious pause and think we need to really interrogate and evaluate this a little bit more and discuss it, that's what the red stickers are for. The yellow stickers are things that maybe feel a little bit neutral, maybe not bold enough, maybe not aligned with our values, or just don't make sense. So as I said earlier, the Community Plan Advisory Committee has met 8 times. They have rolled up their sleeves. They have done a lot of heavy lifting to get these draft recommendations to where they are today. So our hope is there's not a ton of red and yellow, and we're seeing some gold stars, but that's what this group is chartered to do, is hold us accountable, hold ourselves accountable to our values, and make sure that you're flagging trade-offs and some of those things that, you know, because everything's interconnected. If there are pieces that feel disconnected, we want to know, and you're our focus group to help us have this conversation. So enough setup on that. You're all going to get a little scorecard that looks very similar to what we're going to be putting stickers on, just so you can keep score as we speed date around the different areas. And what we're going to do up front here for our neighborhoods, we're going to have Ken from the Community Plan Advisory Committee and Jesse facilitating this station. We are going to have for our townwide considerations in the back of the room, we're going to have Jessica and Troy facilitating that conversation, and they're going to stay anchored there while we all rotate through every 15 minutes. In the breakout room for Bellevue and 6th, Danica and Mel and Roxana, John and Dana are going to staff those stations. And you can see we broke our group here up into 4. We're small, we're agile, we're nimble. Hopefully it'll allow us to every 15 minutes rotate through and keep the discussion at a high level, flagging things that don't make sense so we can structure it that way. But if there are more freeform ideas that you have, we want that too. So if there's something that doesn't resonate and we need to talk it out, you can flag it on the scorecard, you can put it on the wall over here, and we'll all discuss when we come back in roundtable in about an hour. Does that make sense and clear plan of attack?
And due to folks who arrived or couldn't come, we might need to shift the groups just a little bit. Let's start with where we are. Let's start 1 in the neighborhoods and going down the list, but we might need to make some adjustments. Really quickly though, before we go in, we just want to hear from our advisory committee on any lessons learned on the next slide.
Thank you, Mel. And so before we do breakout, since the advisory committee has been so deep into this, we want to make sure that our advisory committee members have a chance to share with the group before we break out. What have you learned in the process? And what do you think that your fellow navigation committee members should be thinking about as we go into this exercise? What are some of your key lessons learned on all the interconnected pieces and parts? And you've all seen this graphic, but we should also note, as by design, there are additional activities that are starting to work their way into this framework. And so the Parks Rec open space and trails plan is now our 5th plan coming under that navigation umbrella. So we wanted to call that out. well, we gave our community plan members a minute to think about what are some of the lessons learned and takeaways that you're gonna impart upon your fellow members here before we break out.
And don't worry, we're not gonna add another year of meetings to your lives, but we want to recognize the Compass has been such a great process that we're really cool to see that carry through in this upcoming plan of following the same process to make sure it's aligned with our values.
I think for me, it seems like the goal is to stimulate free market investment. So I was trying to put myself in the shoes of a developer. And the town, though, we all want affordable housing, and very few affordable housing projects pencil without some form of subsidy. And so just this trade-off, what are we willing to give to get what we want? And I was an advocate for some use by right stuff initially, because I wanted the developer to have more certainty. He knows what he's gonna get without an expensive negotiation process where he spends a lot of money. But I've come back to the performance bonus, to the negotiation. But it's, it's just so hard to build affordable housing. And we have to be willing to give some things if we want to get it, is what I was learning and thinking about.
Yeah, Ken.
I think for me, it's, I've always been trying to learn through this process of trying to open my mind to new ideas, and I invite everybody in this room to, kind of relax their kind of preconceived notions and think about new ideas, because they're out there and they can kind of come to us, and some of this plan, a lot of this plan is kind of putting new ideas out there, and things can get, shot down pretty easily, but I think that I encourage everybody to kind of like get off that bandwagon and get onto the what can the future be? What can we do with our imagination or creativity and to optimize our town to what we really want to, steer it towards in the future? So I've learned to think about these things as an example. I believe I totally was on board about underground parking and parking above ground until I realized that it costs 4 times as much to do underground parking that would just lead to luxury real estate that is not what we're talking about here. It's not what we're trying to promote. So that was something, the thing that I learned right away through this process.
The two things that I would say, just to keep in mind going through discussing the community plan as a whole and what we're trying to achieve, is that change is coming. A lot of the areas of change that we're talking about are empty lots. It's hard to imagine something there, but it's already allowed, like you can build it, it's gonna happen. And so our goal is, what do we want? How are we gonna regulate it? So the second thing is, what we're trying to do is implement regulations to guide how and get what we want out of those already commercial spaces that anybody can come in and put stuff on. So what are we gonna do to get what we want? And what can we use to get that way?
Yeah, such a good point. Danica.
Yeah, they said a lot of what to say, but
It's harder as we go.
yeah, I think like as we were looking at some of like the renderings from the charrette and stuff, as somebody who's lived here forever, it is like, oh, I don't want that there. But then when you think about what 6th Street Station could have been, that is with no regulations. So what we're looking at is, how can we regulate so that if somebody wants to put something there, we get something out of it? It's not like to say, let's go do this tomorrow. It's like to say, if a developer comes to us, we have these tools to get what we want. So, yeah, just think about that.
Roxanne.
I'm just gonna kind of piggyback on what John said. I think my biggest learning has been from the perspective of like what the performance-based model gets us and what that looks like. I think that was something it's a little new. We sort of have that in the PDP model, but not exactly. And I think that's a powerful tool that the town has to wield. And so I've learned a lot of other things,
That's a great point. And hopefully what we've designed today for this exercise is fun and energizing, and we can rotate through and ask questions and then have a robust discussion. So it's almost 10:30. Why don't we break into our groups, Group one. Here, and if you don't see yourself in a group, come find me in Mel and we'll find a home for you. Group one, started neighborhoods up front. Group two, going into the breakout room out in the hall for Bellevue. Group three, starting at 6th Street, which is also in the breakout room down the hall. And then group four in the back of the room here on Townwide and Slate River.
And should we do a 5-minute bio break?
Yeah, well, it's 10:25, so by 10:30 we'll get settled, and then every 15 minutes, I'll ride herd and come around and move us on.
I ain't heard.
I like wrangling.
What you were saying.
You say that. That's true.
Yes, we are.
Yeah. It's a lot of stuff, so. Because-
What happens to the old bonds? Go back to the.
It's exciting, and I'm so excited. You made
Oh, that's awesome.
Really fantastic.
Kids grew up. No, they come back and say, well, it did. If there was no money, I just sort of think so. Their parents spent base around. Where did we get? South. Definitely not very short.
But for long term, like, there were no surrender.
Oh, we are. Awesome.
We got, like, groups around.
Yeah.
All right, everybody. Well, thank you all. For those of you who could stay and break some bread, we're gonna do a little roundtable report out. I just found it super interesting in making the rounds on hearing all the discussions. This conversation did what it was intended to do, and that was identify the difficult questions that remain. And there are questions that we still need to wrestle with. So by abstracting out some of those issues, I think it will allow staff and the Community Plan Advisory Committee to really wrestle with some of those refinements that we need to work through. And one of the things that stood out to me is that this conversation brought the trade-offs into sharp relief. You know, is what we're getting in some of these instances worth what we're potentially gonna compromise and give up? And what I heard a lot is the devil is in the details, and there's a lot of nuance. One size may not fit all in a lot of these situations. I think 6 will actually bring that forward as we talk about that a lot more. But even with the neighborhoods in an area of stability, and then the 2 areas of change plus the townwide and Slate annexation, even with those 4 areas, there's still a lot of maybe one size doesn't fit all conversations that were happening. So with that, those were the big themes that I heard. We're gonna start with the neighborhoods and the areas of stability, and Jesse can report out on what they heard, and then we're gonna go to Bellevue 6, then we'll wrap up with Townwide and Slate. So,
Okay.
Kent and Jesse, the floor is yours.
Yeah. I'm gonna start, but Kent's gonna throw in if I forget anything too. So I think broad spectrum, our group had a lot of folks didn't necessarily touch on areas where they were totally supportive. They honed in on areas where maybe they had pause or concern more. They were more vocal on those areas. So at first it felt negative, but I think there were a lot of areas where there was support, we just didn't focus on those. So the areas I'm gonna focus on, we did have some consistency, and a couple groups about basements, using those as leverage. A lot of people thought that was a great idea. There was discussion to make sure we balance the rental versus ownership in ADUs when we're looking at the micro lots for subdivision and condominiumization. Just pay attention to this balance. Chris Hensley actually brought that up, and I thought that was a really great comment. I had a note that ensuring the fit still aligns with the character and feel of the scale for any changes that are being proposed. I think that was from Donnie, just making sure that no matter, you know, when we're talking about setbacks, zoning changes, those kind of things, making sure that fits. There was some concern about short-term rentals and how that fits into when we're talking about more ADUs, like, does that mean more short-term rentals? And, you know, we have caps on that right now, but just,
Good question.
yeah, so, there was a discussion point brought up in these residential zone districts as far as parking goes. Parking head-in on private lots versus, and the loss of on-street parking was a great concern, so we really need to think about our, what is the parking requirement gonna be for residential, to see how that drives and these areas. We had a general support for the shift from single family to multifamily in certain zone districts. We didn't get into the nitty gritty of which zones, but it seemed like a general consensus about that. The thought of double accessory dwelling units was a concern for some people in some neighborhoods, just because of the tight spots. In some zone districts, there are larger lots, so it seemed like it could be a better potential in those lots. The realities of a tight site with snow storage and parking is also a thing that came up for discussion. Looking at enforcement to ensure that we have ironclad to make sure that people are actually long-term renting these units. If we're looking at making more units and changes to the code, just making sure that we really define that well. And then ensuring that the micro lot cost is realistic. Like, what does that look like when we're talking about carving a piece off, and what is the cost of those new units that we're looking at providing? And then from our last group, we heard someone say to own a smaller unit would be okay, if it meant that they could own in town. And so, and then the idea of communal living came up as well. Kent, what am I forgetting?
You covered my notes pretty well. I would say the unintentional consequences of parking, creating parking, walking, on-street parking, they ignore each other. That was briefly touched on, but the next as we move forward. How does the town incentivize, maybe financially, or be incentivized if they don't want? Talk about that a little bit. That's all I have.
Jesse and Ken, thank you so much for that great summary. For those of you who had additions on the neighborhood areas of stability, anything else stand out to you all from your discussions on our stable neighborhoods? Jesse and Ken, you guys nailed it, very thorough.
Final, this area is the area of stability, so it's gonna have the least amount of change, but it is still will have some change, so. I'm gonna just put that in context when we talk about all the other areas that have a lot more potential change.
Absolutely. Awesome. Well, great summary. Thank you so much. And we'll move on to Bellevue, one of our areas of change, and Mel and Danica, you want to lead the report out on what you heard?
Sorry, we can jump in. So for land use and density, the big thing with Bellevue is allowing more residential density while retaining our light industrial service oriented trades and retail businesses, keeping it the commercial core of town. We really heard from folks who are totally into increasing more residential there. That makes sense. But from half our groups, we heard, hey, let's leverage that residential to get deed restricted commercial space out of it. We really want to maintain that as the commercial core and connecting that success measure of increasing opportunities for establishing or retaining community serving businesses. How do we make sure we have that happen there? So we heard we're open to maybe that luxury penthouse in exchange for deed restricted commercial space. One thing we did hear from one group was, you know, we do want to see some more Mikey's pizzas and coffee shops and things. But a concern around if you start to let that in as land uses, will that kind of gentrify the corridor and push out those businesses we want to keep? And an interesting idea that came up was, could you allow that as a use if it were deed restricted? So in that exchange, if you're getting a deed restricted commercial space, then they could possibly be coffee shop, retail food establishment, but not a free market steakhouse. So that was a very interesting thing that came up. On fit, the biggest things we talked about here was height. This was the one area of town that's being considered for a 4-story. Very mixed feedback. We have 3 reds, 1 yellow, 4 golds. I don't think this is something we're gonna come to consensus on as a community, and that is okay. We heard from folks of just no way, that is not go with our character. We heard from some folks that absolutely makes sense there. And we heard some folks in the middle connecting back to our preservation plan is you might look to like the new fire station and think, oh, that's a really tall, big building. I don't like it. But there's ways with our design standards and guidelines to really make sure buildings that say we're 4 stories or the full 3 stories are really built to maintain our mass scale form where it doesn't feel like a 3-story. And Cal brought up some really good points of how it works with the setbacks and shading and just making sure it really fits the character there. But overall, we heard kind of a lot of support besides that one for the considerations on Bellevue with the recognition of anything that we're thinking about is gonna impact those rough edges. That's such a like subjective nebulous success measure. It's important to think about, but there is recognition of this will impact us going forward. So Danica, what did I miss?
Yeah, I think the only other thing that we've talked about was like, having like sidewalks, making it more pedestrian friendly, which does, like you said, take those rough edges off. But it might be what's necessary if we are gonna have community serving businesses there and residential there. We might have to see the street change. Yeah, that.
So maybe one last thing that Beth brought up that I think could relate to 6th Street is there was recognition of adding more residential could really increase social connections and just bringing more kind of vibrancy and people to the area. So I thought that was a good point too.
And for you all, what else stood out on Bellevue in your conversations?
I just have a general question. Do we have any deed restricted commercial currently? No.
0.
Right here,
Alright.
but that's because we are.
And we do have a lot of town-owned properties that we lease to nonprofits or organizations. They're trying to take a concept like that to the private sector.
Great question. Great question. Anything else stand out on Bellevue in your deliberations and conversations?
When we did our transportation plan, Bellevue was definitely identified as one of the places that has a lot of hard mobility through it because there's a lot of use for that area. That's a place to get through town. And as we think about what a build out would look like, I think that's really important because we need all of these things that we're talking about, but you know, 60 units on a lot over there would change so much about who's driving there, how they drive. And I just, that's, as someone who has spent most of my life living in that area of town, I just think that's important to think about.
It's a great call out. Thank you. Anything else on Bellevue before we move over to 6th? All right, well, on Bellevue and on Sixth, I think two of the most defined areas have changed. Is where I heard a lot of the trade-off conversations, and I think it's evidenced by what we're seeing with the gold stars and the red and yellow. You know, there's some balance there, and there's also some trade-offs that are inherent, and I heard a lot of that on Sixth. So Dana and John and Roxana, you want to lead us out on what some of the big themes were that you heard?
I'll invite Roxana and John they did a great job facilitating.
I think John said that we will be here in a minute. There wasn't a lot of consensus. Not on the vision, or what people would like. There was some consensus on people wanting to require things more than performance-based. And I just wondered, I wanted to talk to Troy, like, how can we get more of what we want? Is it through requirement and use by right, or is it through performance-based negotiation? Everybody kind of went towards the requirement. If we want things, then let's require it. There were people that were fine with the 38-foot height, and there were people that wanted us to limit development to 2 stories on Sixth Street to have better view for it. And so it was all over the map. That was hard. That was a hard one to read. But it was very good and robust discussion. I think, people see Sixth Street and want different things. And people want different things if we are gonna get negotiated developers. Some want housing, some want deed restricted commercial.
Roxana, do you want to add anything?
No, I'm gonna break it down. I think we wrote a lot. And part of that was that when we got into conversations, the substantive stuff is much harder to quantify by putting a sticker on, on a chart. As the groups came through, if I break it down, I think the first group, there was a little bit of getting our bearings sort of thing, but what came out of that was potentially the question of the raising the 3 foot in order to incentivize housing. And like John mentioned, it was more of why are we not requiring it, and what does that dance look like in those 2? And I don't think that there was a lot of consensus on raising. And then the next group that came through, I think the question that really kind of opened up a much bigger conversation was the character of town being a space that as you come into town, there is a lot of open space right now. And there isn't a lot of density. And what does that look like, and how do we protect that, particularly in the entrance of the corridor? And so that's a little bit of a conversation about, can we split the zoning in this corridor so that we have lower density requirements as you come in, and we preserve the open space on the left side as it exists now? And then have a bigger conversation about the incentives and maybe maxing out if they are towards the second half of the corridor, where it could have influences on, traffic calming. That was a different group that talked about that, but it kind of links. And then we had a group come in that was going in the opposite direction, which was the group that felt like the trade-offs that we would get from the 16 units or whatever we were gonna gain by raising these 3 feet was not worth what we were giving up. And that in fact, that there are other outlets for those housing units that wouldn't substantially change the character of town as we go through the corridor. And then I think in the last one, the takeaway was kind of a more woven conversation. Well, I'd say group 3 really did like the negotiation to be about commercial be restricted, rather than the benefits of the housing unit we would get. And I would say that was echoed by the last group, but the last group had a little more conversation about how building out that commercial zone on the back end really informs traffic as it comes into town, like how do we manage that flow, and what the character is. One thing that I take away from, which is that I realized Dara, rough edges, may I mention your love. So her definition of rough edges was very different from what I think most of us take away, which her definition of rough edges was use versus appearance, architecture, quality of the amenities around was her rough edges definition, which was, I thought was interesting, because when I think of rough edges, I think of like the fact that we don't have a continuous sidewalk, or that you have to walk on the street, or that there's, you know, kind of a quirkiness to the way that we have built out town. And so I thought that was an interesting shift of perspective that maybe I'll have to throw out. That's it.
What's an example of that?
Well, I mean, I'm thinking for me, the 16 station proposal with a luxury hotel, right? And that's something that had been entitled and could be done again versus something being built there, being tall and big and whatever, because that's what we allow now. But serving, having some reason I would ever go there. And I think me having a situation that is luxury lodging is much more polished than having something where there's a retail outlet or a coffee shop or something that is. Because no matter what gets built there, it's gonna be very pretty. I mean, right.
They're not gonna build like a crappy building.
Yeah, no, I'm supportive of giving the context of
Cool thing,
I mean, I love to value, I hope it's doing there forever, but whatever gets built that's new, it's not gonna look like that. Right, so using that as the guideline, so every rough edge in that context.
That makes sense.
Yeah, that's such a great conversation.
Our group also ended up going down that pathway of what is the definition of rough edges, and it's more like the community, you know, that we appreciate, like the weirdos. You know, exactly.
Call them weird. Call them weird.
So that's what
Your
makes us.
guidance or our costumes that I'll talk about.
And so, we're a big lot of people, but we're all wearing costumes right now.
If I can add one summary, thanks Roxana and John. What I heard from the staff's perspective is this really big question of, is 6th Street really the place where we want to focus on housing? Or is that more, should we be more intentional about commercial deed restricted spaces? That was, I think, the question around like requiring, what are we getting if we do require these incentives versus, just incentivizing. It's like, I feel like the conversation always rounded out to like, are we comfortable with focusing housing there? Does that fit?
Well, and I think we need to put the plans together, because if we do a whole bunch of deed restricted commercial on Bellevue, and then we do a whole bunch of deed restricted commercial on 6th, and then we get some at the 4-way, then we end up with too much deed restricted.
Nowhere.
I think there is. I think there is. I think you could end up with too much deed restricted commercial, because deed restriction restricts certain things. So, I mean, like deed restricted housing, not everybody fits into that housing. I mean, I have an employee who like didn't even qualify for the new housing, and like for various reasons. So I just think, yes, I definitely want deed restricted commercial, but I think we do need to think, we don't want it everywhere, and we want a mix of housing.
That's it. And to clarify that the discussion wasn't one or the other. It was both. But I think with the incentives being more heavy towards commercial, and then you kind of let the investors decide which one is better for them, but also there was a lot more consensus, I would say, in required rather than negotiation. So not performance based. And I wanted to add one more thing that's not entirely relevant to what we were talking about, but the conversation about like the quality, if we are moving towards, you know, say incentivizing a rowing unit, what does the quality of that rowing unit look like? Where, you know, what are the constraints that we're putting, or how do we say to the builder, it can't be like, you know, 3 row units in the basement. This was more like Eric's perspective, like that are not that desirable, and how do we moving forward, we'll weave that into the conversations when we talk about each district. So I thought.
What I took away from the,
Yeah.
the part that I liked about the 6th Street conversation was dezoning, I think it was called,
Downzoning.
downzoning. And Garrett informed me that nobody ever downzones, and so I think that's a great thing to do.
It means it's a good idea.
And like, it makes Sixth Street Station as entitled at one point impossible. And it makes any incentives that we want, any performance incentives that we want to implement, it makes them stronger. Because, yeah, you bring it down to 30 feet and you said you can go up to 38, you can add a whole nother story if X, Y, and Z, and that just holds more weight if they can't do Sixth Street Station at all, right?
And I think that speaks to like the perspective that you and the previous group had, which was be incentivized, like make it hard so that we don't necessarily incentivize development there. That maybe there is nothing wrong with it, right? If I understood that to be the point of that.
Well, it was the trade-off too. You're gonna, you're maintaining the character of the town, and you can completely give up on that for 15. Right. What kind of trade-off is that? Right. And some people like that trade-off. I think are.
And then 35, it can be a 35-foot two-story. Just high floor to
Or
ceiling.
lower it, like, instead of talking about adding 3, take off 5.
No, so that's what I wanted is to really be specific and get to heights, because a 35-foot two-story building is an incredible floor to ceiling height, so you'll get restoration hardware or higher, maybe a Prana on the ground floor with a multi-million-dollar residential above in 2 stories. Just, you can do that in 35 feet.
Yeah, but you can do that now too.
No,
So
we allow 35 feet.
Right. But I think what the discussion was what is the, like, we can create restrictions and then do a performance-based, but create an incremental, like from 30 to 35, you have to do this, and then from 35 to 38, you have to do this other thing, but our base is actually lower than it is right now.
Right.
And so, that's all.
Do we have any restrictions around chains?
Yes, we do.
Formula-based isn't really that.
For
We
the
have
what?
limitations of formula-based.
We can't prohibit them. You have to allow any land use within your town constitutionally, but you can put them in spaces they don't want to go. So, right, so our formula-based business says, if you want a formula-based business, you can go in the C zone. There's no drive-by traffic. They want to be on the 6th Street corridor with visibility, so you can disincentive, legally, you have to allow them, but you don't have to allow them in spaces they want to go. And that's what our ordinance does.
Yeah.
And that's what our ordinance does.
I agree with this.
So the last piece, oddly enough, is where we have far more consensus than the rest, it's parking. Who would have thunk? So I think in general, the devil's in the details, Miles, with what you said, but I would say there's overall, everyone except one said, go for it. But the devils are in the details. So specifically in terms of the physical character, there's a lot of unanswered questions. In terms of the design, look, fit, how it actually looks on the ground. That lies solely in next year's conversation or later this year's conversation on the design standards and guidelines. So there are a lot of caution is reducing the parking ratio in the buildings that and the additional density that would come out of it. Is that consistent with the character, physical character? Now, the question some people said yes, absolutely, because we have areas of town that don't have the parking. Others said, whoa, we're not ready there yet. That's what the design standards and zoning will figure out. And so that's natural as you go from policy to place, that is the next conversation. As far as using it as a tool to increase full-time occupancy, distribute deed restricted units around towns, everyone said, yes, this is the tool to use. As for commercial, it was kind of a mixed bag. Many of the people said deed restricted commercial, they don't understand commercial parking needs. And so while they support it, they don't know. And they didn't feel that they could answer, so they were yellow. As far as strengthening to the public realm and social interactions, Some people said absolutely it creates that opportunity, other people, that was in the details, right? What is that performance negotiation? Are we getting the spaces we need out of it in the design standards and guidelines and zoning? So that's a great observation. Is it consistent with the rough edge? Most of the people said absolutely it is consistent with it. Some people said we don't know yet. And that's a fair comment. As far as its consistency with the climate action plan and transportation plan, pretty much everyone said yes. There were a couple of comments on the end of do these apply to everyone. Some people said this applies across the board. One person said this is just too much too soon, don't know, and they were putting bread on her. You know, a person's comment. And right next to him, there was yellow saying not enough. So too much and not enough. Were right next to each other. Welcome to Mel's new world. Happy to leave it. Just kidding. But I think this is very interesting. People understand the tool and they understand the benefits that it's creating space on the lots for something else. How that fits the devil's in the details. And then lastly, I think Lolita said this, and I think it's an absolute fair comment because Anna brought it up too. Well, what about this, and this about transportation, right? Fair comment. You've got to hold council and staff accountable to implement the transportation plan, to implement the climate action plan, to implement the historic preservation plan. This is not a plan in isolation, right? A lot of the parking requirements depend on the town continually implementing the transportation plan, working with the county and RTA at Park and Ride at Brush Creek, working with Mountain Express and RTA to increase transit efficiency. It's not the town's sole responsibility. It is the region's responsibility. That's what the corridor plan is for. But you've got to implement all the plans. And that is a 100% valid. That is why we're doing what we're doing in a very intentional way over 4 years, because we know that. And so I just wanted to at least end it there. I don't know, Jessica, if you wanted to add what you heard from the group.
Yeah, I mostly heard that people are willing to use parking as a leverage tool in exchange for things that we might want to see a free market developer put in. Maybe not necessarily, except for, you know, take away, have it no problem. She would like see zero required. No parking. But, you know, for, I think most everybody, parking's pretty important, to have as an option, you know, especially for commercial spaces, which is a lot of what we're talking about. But especially for deed-restricted residential housing, it could be leveraged to get those units. But in partnership with the other community members, Gunnison, RTA, Mount Crested especially need to step up their parking options and figure their stuff out so that, you know, when we put these into place, those people don't have to have us as an option, you know, for their parking. You know, specifically, you know, Pyramid is kind of just park all their stuff there because they can't park it on Mount Crested. They can't park it in CD South, so they park it there. Well, we change, you know, once housing goes in there and there's 100 people living in the affordable housing pyramid, that's gonna change because those parking needs are gonna change. But you know, whose responsibility is that? Not ours, but totally, wholly to figure out, but in partnership with the corridor plan, that is something that's on the discussion.
Back to you, Miles.
Awesome. Any other final thoughts from the group? Wrapping this all together, I think so much of what we've heard today is finding that balance, and there's so much trade-off to be navigated because a lot of these decisions are right versus right. They're not necessarily a right versus wrong, and those right versus right decisions can be the hardest ones to find balance and compromise. And that's where council, staff, this group, and the whole community needs to work together to build on the common ground and navigate those right versus right decisions to find the right balance. So, Mel, I don't know if you have
I have an overall thing,
Yeah, thanks.
before people leave, I just, doing this for 4 years, understanding how much we all invested in this. understanding how much this is just such a huge, overwhelming concept and process. And all this time and all this energy and all this good ideas and good jujus could get totally screwed up at any minute because there aren't any regulations stopping people from doing things that they can do right now. I personally came up in my mind, I would like to see the town council, I'm sorry, I can't see only one here left, and Beth and Anna are gone, but the staff could maybe drive it. I'd like to see a moratorium on everything right now, any kind of building, temporary, don't get everybody all woo-woo crazy. And I'd like us to make a decision as to what we really want to see at Sixth Street, really want to see at Bellevue, really want to see, and then open it up for people to be able to be under those regulations. Because at this moment, when Anna was saying that this massive real estate company bought the old town inn, they could put this massive building there right now instead of this wonderful, cute little quaint hotel that we drive in and see when we drive into town. So I think it's time for us to take some major steps to try to figure this out. But we spent 4 years. Let's don't make these 4 years go to waste. Let's do something right now to stop things from getting screwed up that we've been trying to work on and not screw up.
I love that.
Yes. Yes.
We're redoing our building code, building.
And this process is a perfect reason for it.
Yeah.
It has to be timed.
Yeah.
Yeah, not in perpetuity. 14 years. And you're all gonna be dead by the time.
I'm not telling you anything you don't know, but, when, as a council member in Mount CB, when we get that in writing, that's a lot more fodder to be able to bring to the table, because every single piece of, correspondence we get has to be shared in a council meeting. So things like, the conversation about Mount CB needing parking, like, if you sent me an email saying exactly that, then I would have to bring it to the council, as like an item, and it's no, every piece of correspondence is presented at every council.
Because we all affect each other.
Yeah.
We didn't know Crested affects us, we affect them,
Yeah,
Yeah,
and that's also as a current council member, like, I'm frustrated when we have a piece of development in front of us, and because of existing zoning, I can only do so much about it. Because it's the existing zoning that has like really made that able to be developed in whatever way is already set in place, so. Yeah. So, good point, though.
What's next? But thanks, everybody.
Okay, so I just-
Thanks for all your hard work and all of your
Just a
years.
quick wrap up. Thank you all so much. Wow, the discussions today were just amazing and such amazing ideas, and I'd love to keep it going. Please keep noodling on the breakouts today, the draft plan, and send me any feedback or ideas or your worksheets if you want by February 21st, so you can help us really improve the draft plan. We're gonna come out to it with the public on March 7th. And please save the date. We're planning on March 19th, doing an open house here at the center and possibly doing the speed dating style-esque community wide. So if you have any feedback too on how to make that better as well, let me know. And just please always reach out. Feel free to set up a meeting with us if you want to talk more about your ideas. And we do want to have one last navigation meeting just to really wrap up things as we're nearing the end of this process, moving more into implementation with our code update. We don't know exactly when yet. We're working through the town hall move and the transition of our department. But please save the date tentatively for early summer before things get crazy to just have one last meeting. You'll still get your stipends and lunch and everything like that. Please take food to go, and I'll pull in a cart from the room to put your dishes in, if you don't mind just scraping them into the trash, and thank you all so much. Oh, yes, compost, thank you, you're right.
Thank you, Dan.
If anyone wants an electronic version of this, let us know. The scorecard, you can fill it out, hard copy.